High above the clouds, where the earth meets the sky, stands a mountain that has captured the human imagination for over a century. Mount Everest. Chomolungma, Sagarmatha, the highest point on our planet. But this mountain holds more than just altitude records. It holds secrets, mysteries that have remained unsolved for decades, perhaps forever frozen in its icy embrace. Above 26,000 feet lies what mountaineers call the death zone. Here, the air has only a third of the oxygen found at sea level. The human body can't adapt. It can only survive temporarily, slowly dying with each passing hour. Temperatures plummet to 40 below, and hurricane-force winds can hurl a person into the void. In this hostile realm, the line between life and death is razor thin. And it is here, in this frozen wilderness, where most of Everest's mysteries reside. Bodies lie preserved, their final moments unknown. Climbers vanish without a trace. Questions remain unanswered, suspended in time. Since the first attempts to climb Everest began in 1922, over 300 people have died on this mountain. Their bodies, in many cases, remain where they fell. Retrieving them is extraordinarily dangerous and expensive. So many families choose to leave their loved ones on the mountain, considering it their final resting place. Everest has become a vertical cemetery where the frozen dead bear witness to all who pass. Some bodies have even become landmarks, given nicknames like Green Boots or Sleeping Beauty. Each name represents a life cut short, a story ended abruptly in the pursuit of standing atop the world. What draws people to such a deadly place? Is it the ultimate challenge? The allure of joining an elite group who have stood on the roof of the world? Or is it something deeper, a need to confront mortality itself? But the mountain demands a heavy price for such ambitions. Sometimes it takes fingers and toes. Sometimes it takes lives, leaving behind only questions. Did they reach the summit? What went wrong in those final moments? These questions echo through the decades, unanswered. Among all of Everest's unsolved mysteries, one stands above the rest. In June 1924, two British climbers, George Mallory and Andrew "Sandy" Irvine, made a summit attempt. They were last seen climbing strongly toward the top. Then the clouds rolled in, and they disappeared. The question that has haunted mountaineering for a century is simple. Did they reach the summit? If they did, they would have beaten Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay by 29 years, rewriting history. Mallory's body was found in 1999, but Irvine's body and a camera he was believed to be carrying remained missing. The mystery seemed forever unsolved, until a National Geographic team made a stunning discovery in September 2024. The bodies on Everest are more than just tragic reminders. For many climbers, they serve as grim guideposts. Green Boots, believed to be Indian climber Tsewang Paljor, lay for years in a cave on the main route. Climbers had to step over his bright green boots to continue their ascent. Sleeping Beauty. Francys Arsentiev, the first American woman to summit without supplemental oxygen, died on her descent. Her peaceful appearance haunted those who passed by for 9 years. These aren't just statistics. They are people with dreams and families. Their presence raises uncomfortable questions about what we owe our fellow human beings when we find them at their most vulnerable. In recent years, Everest has become more accessible, yet no less deadly. Commercial expeditions guide hundreds of climbers to the summit each season. Sadly, the mountain is now littered with abandoned gear and waste, but more traffic hasn't solved the mysteries. It's created new ones. In 2024 alone, multiple climbers vanished. 2 experienced Mongolian mountaineers disappeared without a trace. A British climber and a Sherpa guide were struck by an ice fall and were never seen again. Even with GPS and modern tech, the mountain continues to swallow secrets. Some mysteries on Everest go beyond the physical. Sherpa guides, the backbone of every expedition, tell stories of the supernatural. Record-holding climber Pemba Dorje claims to have seen ghosts on the mountain. Others report hearing voices in the wind or seeing figures in the mist that vanish. Are these just hallucinations brought on by a lack of oxygen and extreme exhaustion? Or is there something else on Everest that defies rational explanation? The Sherpas, who know the mountain best, take these encounters seriously, performing rituals to seek protection from the mountain goddess they call Chamalungma, Mother of the World. And no discussion of Everest is complete without mentioning the Yeti. For centuries, local people have told stories of a large ape-like being living in the high Himalayas. Explorers have reported enormous footprints in the snow. In 1951, Eric Shipton's expedition photographed mysterious tracks at 20,000 feet. Despite numerous searches, no conclusive evidence has ever emerged. The creature remains somewhere between myth and possibility. Yet the stories persist, passed down through generations. Over the next 2 hours, we will explore the deepest mysteries of Mount Everest. We will examine the evidence, investigate the most famous disappearances, and consider the ethical dilemmas of death in the death zone. We will journey back to 1924 with Mallory and Irvine, meet the lost climbers still on the mountain, and explore the summit fever that drives people to make fatal decisions. What is it about this mountain that continues to draw people to their deaths, even as it refuses to give up its secrets? So settle in, breathe deeply, and let your mind descend with us into the thin air and deep cold, into the realm where mysteries remain frozen in time, and where the mountain keeps its own counsel, silent and eternal. On June 8, 1924, geologist Noel Odell was on Mount Everest when the clouds above him briefly parted. For just a moment, he saw 2 tiny figures silhouetted against the sky, moving towards the summit. Those figures were George Mallory and Sandy Irvine. Then the clouds closed in, and they were never seen alive again. That single sighting has fueled a century-long debate. Did they reach the top of the world 29 years before Hillary and Tenzing? George Mallory was 37, a veteran climber with a poetic soul. When a reporter famously asked him why he wanted to climb Everest, he gave the classic reply, "Because it's there." But his drive ran deeper. He carried a photograph of his wife, Ruth, promising to leave it on the summit. When his body was found 75 years later, the photo was gone. His partner was 22-year-old Sandy Irvine, the expedition's mechanical genius. Young and strong, Irvine was an expert at fixing the team's temperamental oxygen gear, a skill Mallory valued highly. He was the one carrying the Kodak camera, the one piece of evidence that could rewrite history. For decades, the mountain held its secrets. Then, on May 1st, 1999, climber Conrad Anker made a startling discovery at 27,000 feet. A body, frozen and preserved, with a name tag in the collar, G. Mallory. He had a severe rope injury around his waist, suggesting he and Irvine fell while roped together. But crucially, the camera wasn't with him. The biggest question has always been the second step, a sheer 90-foot rock face just below the summit. Today, a ladder makes it manageable, but in 1924, Mallory and Irvine would have had to free climb it in leather boots and wool clothing. Could it even be done? Experts are divided. Mallory was one of the best rock climbers of his era, but the altitude and primitive gear would have made it a monumental challenge. For 100 years, Sandy Irvine remained lost. Expeditions searched, but found nothing. Then, just this year, in September 2024, a documentary team led by Jimmy Chin was on the Rongbuk Glacier when they noticed something melting out of the ice. It was a vintage hobnailed boot with a foot still inside. On the sock, they found red embroidered letters. A C. Irvine. A piece of the mystery had finally been found, 1,000 feet below where Mallory lay, reinforcing the theory of a catastrophic fall. But the camera, the one thing that could provide definitive proof, is still missing. Experts believe that if the camera is found and was sealed from moisture, the cold temperatures may have actually preserved the film. We might still be able to develop the pictures and see what Irvine saw in those final hours. So, did they make it? Some historians say yes. Mallory's snow goggles were in his pocket, suggesting he was descending after dark, possibly from a late summit. And then there's the missing photo of his wife. Others say no, arguing the second step was simply too difficult, and they likely fell in exhaustion, defeated. The truth is, we don't know. Perhaps the mystery itself is their true legacy, a story of ambition and courage that inspires us to this day. A century ago, Mallory and Irvine climbed into the clouds, and in a way, they never came down. They remain on Everest, forever climbing, forever just out of reach. At 8,500 meters on the northeast ridge of Mount Everest, there's a small limestone cave, barely big enough to shelter a person from the wind. For nearly 2 decades, this alcove served as a grim landmark for climbers. Inside, curled up as if sleeping, lay a body wearing bright green mountaineering boots. The fluorescent color was unmistakable in the world of rock and ice. Climbers called him Green Boots. For years, no one knew his name for sure, though most believed he was an Indian climber named Tsewang Paljor. To pass, climbers had to step over his outstretched legs, a chilling encounter with the mountain's power. Some would pause and pay respects. Others hurried past. But everyone remembered Green Boots. He became the most famous body on Everest, a marker more reliable than any GPS, a constant reminder that the summit always comes with a price. To understand who Green Boots was, we have to go back to 1996, one of the deadliest years in Everest's history. While most attention was on the tragedy immortalized in Into Thin Air on the south side, another disaster was unfolding on the north. An Indian expedition from the Indo-Tibetan Border Police was attempting to be the first from their country to summit from the Tibetan side. They were tough, experienced climbers, relying entirely on their own skills. Among them was 28-year-old Tsewang Paljor, a passionate mountaineer thrilled to be on this historic climb. On May 10, 1996, as a massive storm system barreled towards Everest, Paljor and 2 teammates, Tsewang Smanla and Dorj Morup, pushed for the summit. It was a fateful decision. The weather on Everest can turn in an instant. That afternoon, as the three climbers neared the top, a blizzard rolled in. Visibility dropped to zero. The wind howled. At around 3:45 p.m., they radioed down, celebrating that they'd reached the summit. But experts now question if, in the storm and oxygen-deprived confusion, they mistook a false summit for the real one. What's certain is that after that radio call, everything went wrong. Exhausted and fighting the storm on their descent, the men got separated. One by one, they succumbed to the mountain. And Tsewang Paljor crawled into that limestone cave, seeking shelter. He curled up, his bright green boots visible at the entrance, and there he died, alone in the storm. But was Green Boots really Tsewang Paljor? While the evidence is strong, he wore those distinctive green boots and died in that area. It has never been officially confirmed. A senior member of the Indian expedition later suggested Green Boots might actually be Dorje Morup, another of the climbers who died that day. He cited reports from other teams who saw Morup in distress in that location. Without a formal identification, the debate continues. What we know for sure is that Green Boots represents one of the three brave Indian climbers who paid the ultimate price for their dream that day. From 1996 to around 2014, Green Boots remained in his cave, a landmark for every climber on the route. We passed Green Boots at 4 a.m. Climbers would log. The proximity to death was motivating for some, a reminder to stay alert. For others, it was deeply disturbing. The body became controversial. Was it right to use a person as a navigation point? Should he be buried? Debates raged online, but on the mountain, Green Boots remained, a silent fixture as seasons passed. Then, in 2014, climbers ascending the ridge noticed the cave was empty. Green Boots was gone. Had the authorities removed him? Was he buried under rocks? No one knew. Rumors flew. Some said it was a burial. Others said a small avalanche might have moved him. The mystery of his disappearance became almost as famous as his presence. Then, a few years later, reports surfaced that he was visible again, partially covered by rocks. Even in death, this unknown climber continued to be a source of questions and uncertainty on the world's highest peak. This story raises profound ethical questions. Recovering a body from the death zone above 8,000 meters is incredibly dangerous and expensive, often costing over $70,000 and risking the lives of the rescuers. Many families choose to leave their loved ones on the mountain, considering it their final resting place. But is it acceptable to then use their remains as landmarks? It's a hard question with no easy answer. Everest forces us to confront the cold, harsh realities of our own limitations in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Imagine the family of Tsewang Paljor. They not only grieved his loss, but also had to live with the knowledge that his body had become a famous photographed spectacle. In their culture, proper funeral rites are deeply important, yet they also understood he died pursuing his passion. It's a complex and heartbreaking situation that many families of Everest victims face, torn between wanting their loved ones home and accepting the mountain as their final resting place. Green Boots isn't the only body to become a landmark. Others, like Sleeping Beauty and the German Woman, served as waypoints for years. In a place called Rainbow Valley, The brightly colored climbing suits of the dead are a stark reminder of the risks. On Everest, people with full lives and families who love them are reduced to nameless warnings. It's a troubling necessity for survival in a place where dwelling on death can be fatal. Whether visible or not, whether Paljor or Morup, Green Boots has left a permanent mark on Everest history. The cave is still called Green Boots Cave. The story is a legend. It reminds us that Everest is never truly conquered. The mountain remains a wild, deadly place. Those bright green boots, wherever they may be, symbolize the high price of ambition and the courage of those who dare to chase their dreams to the top of the world. He has become part of the mountain itself, no longer a climber, but a legend. Francys Arsentiev had a dream: to be the first American woman to summit Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. Born in Honolulu, far from the world's highest peaks, she built a seemingly ordinary life as an accountant in Colorado. But beneath the surface, a fire for mountaineering burned brightly. She conquered peaks across the US and Europe, each summit pushing her closer to the ultimate prize, Everest. In 1992, she married Sergei Arsentiev, a renowned Russian climber. They were a perfect match, a formidable team bound by love and a shared passion for high-altitude adventure. Together with Francys's son, Paul, they were a family. But in 1998, Francys and Sergei set their sights on a goal that would test them to their absolute limits. They would attempt to climb Everest together without bottled oxygen. This was an incredibly audacious plan. At the time, climbing Everest without O2 was a feat achieved by only a handful of people. The death zone, above 26,000 feet, is no place for the human body. The air is so thin, you are essentially suffocating with every step. But Francys was determined. She had something to prove. On May 17, 1998, Francys and Sergei began their ascent from the Tibetan side. They climbed alone, without guides or Sherpas, relying solely on their own skill and strength. Their first attempt failed due to malfunctioning headlamps. A second attempt was thwarted by bad weather. Many would have turned back, heeding the mountain's warnings. But on May 22nd, they went for it a third time. They climbed through the night, pushing their bodies and minds to the breaking point. And they made it. Francys Arsentiev stood on top of the world, the first American woman to do so without supplemental oxygen. She had achieved her dream. Exhausted but triumphant, they embraced, took their photos, and then began the descent. This is where triumph would twist into one of Everest's most heartbreaking tragedies. The descent is always the most dangerous part. Your body is depleted, your judgment is clouded, and in the death zone, time is your mortal enemy. As they descended into the darkness, exhaustion overwhelmed them. They had spent far too long at an extreme altitude. At some point, in the cold and confusion, they became separated. We don't know exactly how. Maybe Francys collapsed, too tired to move. Maybe Sergei didn't realize she was no longer behind him. By morning, Sergei had reached a lower camp, but Francys was still high on the mountain, alone. An Uzbek climbing team found her. She was barely conscious, suffering from severe frostbite and altitude sickness. They tried to help, giving her oxygen, but she couldn't move on her own. The Uzbeks faced a terrible choice: stay and risk their own lives in a futile rescue, or leave her and save themselves. It's the cruel, unforgiving calculus of the death zone. They made the agonizing decision to descend. On their way down, they met Sergei climbing back up, carrying oxygen and medicine for his wife. He knew she was in trouble. They warned him of the danger, but he pressed on into the darkness, determined to save her. He was never seen alive again. Francys spent that night alone at 27,200 feet, her body slowly shutting down. What did she think about? Her husband climbing up to find her? Her 11-year-old son, Paul, waiting at home? We'll never know. The next morning, another team of climbers, Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd, found her. She was still alive, her eyes open. She looked at them and whispered, "Don't leave me." Those words would haunt them forever. They tried to help for over an hour, giving her oxygen, trying to warm her. But she was frozen, unable to move. With their own lives on the line, they too had to make the impossible decision to leave her behind. Other climbers passed her that day. They reported hearing her call out, "Why are you doing this to me?" She pleaded with them not to abandon her. It's a plea that strikes at the core of our humanity. But in that lethal environment, a rescue was impossible. To help would mean to die. While Francys was dying, her husband Sergei had already met his fate. His body was found a year later. It appeared he had fallen while trying to get back to his wife. He had already reached safety, but chose to go back up into the death zone. It was an act of incredible love and courage, one that ultimately cost him his life and left their son an orphan. Francys Arsentiev's body remained where she died, preserved by the cold. For 9 years, she was a landmark on the main climbing route. Her peaceful appearance earned her the eerie nickname, Sleeping Beauty. For climbers, she was a grim reminder of the mountain's power. For her family, it was a source of unimaginable pain. In 2007, Ian Woodall, one of the climbers who had been forced to leave her, led an expedition to give her a proper burial. He and his team wrapped her body in an American flag and moved her to a less conspicuous location, creating a small stone cairn. It was an act of respect, an attempt to restore the dignity she had been denied in death. Before she left for Everest, Francys's son Paul had a nightmare. He dreamt of 2 climbers trapped in a sea of white snow. He was so disturbed, he called his mother in Nepal to tell her. Shortly after, his nightmare came true. For years, he lived with the knowledge that his mother's body was a public spectacle on the world's highest mountain. Francys Arsentiev achieved her dream, but the cost was absolute. Her life, her husband's life, and her son's childhood. Was it worth it? There's no easy answer. She made her choice, knowing the risks. But the tragedy of Sleeping Beauty is a stark reminder that our choices never just affect us. On October 2nd, 1979, Hannelore Schmatz became the 4th woman in history to summit Mount Everest. She was an experienced, capable climber, not a novice taking a wild risk. Born in Germany after World War II, she discovered a passion for high-altitude climbing through her husband, Gerhard Schmatz, a renowned mountaineer. Together, they climbed some of the world's highest peaks, a true partnership in life and adventure. By 1979, Hannelore was a seasoned veteran, having become the first German woman to climb a peak over 7,000 meters. She was 39 years old when she set her sights on the biggest prize of all, Everest. She was about to achieve something remarkable and become the first woman to die on its unforgiving slopes. The 1979 German expedition was a serious affair, with a team of experienced climbers and dedicated Sherpa support. After weeks of acclimatizing and battling blizzards, they established their high camp at the South Col, a desolate, wind-scoured saddle at over 26,000 feet. It's from this harsh place that final summit pushes begin. The team split into two groups. Gerhard's group would go first. Hannelore's would follow a day later. On October 1st, Gerhard's team set off. They reached the summit that afternoon, making the 50-year-old Gerhard the oldest person at the time to stand on top of the world. But he knew the job was only half done. The descent is often deadlier. Exhaustion, lack of oxygen, and the sheer psychological letdown can lead to fatal mistakes. Every minute in the death zone above 26,000 feet is a minute your body is actively dying. Gerhard made a crucial call: descend immediately, no lingering. He urged his wife to do the same. This decision saved his life. Tragically, she did not follow his advice. The next morning, Hannelore's group started their ascent. Her husband, from a lower camp, radioed her, warning of deteriorating weather. He begged her to turn back, but summit fever, that dangerous obsession that clouds judgment, had likely taken hold. They were so close. They pushed on, and at 2 p.m., Hannelore stood on the summit of Everest. A dream realized, but the clock was ticking. Summiting so late in the day meant descending in darkness, after hours of grueling effort at extreme altitude. As they descended, exhaustion overwhelmed them. The American climber in her group, Ray Jennett, ran out of oxygen. The Sherpas pleaded with them to keep moving down to the safety of Camp 4. But Hannelore and Ray felt they couldn't go on. They made a fatal decision to bivouac, to spend the night in the open, in the death zone. One of their Sherpas, Sungdair, bravely stayed with them, knowing the risk. In temperatures of 40 below zero, with no shelter, survival is nearly impossible. By morning, Ray Jennett was dead. Hannelore was alive, but barely. Sungdair, despite his own severe frostbite, began helping her down. But just 330 feet above the safety of camp, Hannelore collapsed. Her last words were a plea for water. Then she died. She was so close, just minutes from safety. But at that altitude, 330 feet might as well be 330 miles. Hannelore Schmatz's body remained where she fell, frozen in a sitting position, leaning against her pack. Her eyes were open, her hair blowing in the wind. For years, she became a grim landmark on the main route to the summit, known simply as the German Woman. Climbers would pass within feet of her, a chilling reminder of the mountain's power. One mountaineer described her as a sinister guard, feeling as if she watched him as he passed. In 1984, a recovery team was sent to bring her body down. But in a cruel twist of fate, a sudden, violent windstorm hit, and both rescuers were blown off the mountain to their deaths. The attempt was abandoned. It had cost 2 more lives to try and retrieve one. A few years later, the mountain finally reclaimed Hannelore. The same fierce winds likely blew her body down the massive Kangshong face, where she now rests, hidden from view. Her husband, Gerhard, returned from his triumph to a world of grief. His victory felt hollow. The team came home, he later wrote, but I alone without my beloved Hannelore. In a heartbreaking postscript, he later found Hannelore's camera for sale in a Kathmandu market, looted from her body on the mountain. He bought it back, a final, tangible piece of the woman he loved. Hannelore Schmatz was the first woman to die on the upper slopes of Everest. Her death was not about gender. It was about the brutal reality of the death zone. It is a story of how thin the line is between the ultimate triumph and the ultimate tragedy. She stood on top of the world, and just a few hours later, the mountain took everything. On May 15, 2006, inside a small limestone cave high on Mount Everest, a British climber named David Sharp was dying. He sat with his arms wrapped around his legs, frozen to the rock, his face showing severe frostbite. He was confused, uncoordinated classic signs of extreme altitude sickness. Over the next several hours, more than 40 climbers passed David Sharp as he sat helpless in that cave. Some shouted at him, some assumed he was already dead, and a few tried to help before realizing he was beyond saving. David's death became one of the most controversial events in Everest history, sparking a fierce debate. What do climbers owe each other in the death zone? Is reaching the summit more important than saving a life? David's story, partially caught on camera, forces us to confront the brutal ethics of high-altitude mountaineering. So, who was David Sharp? Born near London, he was an engineer with a passion for the mountains. He was a talented climber who had already tackled peaks across Europe and Africa. This was his third attempt on Everest. After 2 previous tries, one of which cost him several toes to frostbite, he was determined. He told friends, "If I don't do it this time, I'm not coming back." He was 34 years old. To save money, David chose a basic logistics package for around $6,200, a fraction of the cost of a fully guided expedition. This meant he had a permit and some supplies, but crucially, no Sherpa support, no guide, and no radio. He was climbing essentially alone, making his own life or death decisions in the most dangerous place on Earth. On the night of May 13th, David began his solo push for the summit. He was climbing without a radio, with minimal oxygen, following the standard route. But somewhere in the darkness, things went terribly wrong. We don't know the exact sequence of events, but we know he was struggling. Around 1 a.m., a team saw a climber sitting in the snow, but assumed he was one of Everest's many frozen corpses and moved on. Later, they saw the same figure higher up. He was still climbing, but very, very slowly. Whether he reached the summit or turned back just short, we'll never know for sure. What is certain is that on his descent, exhausted and suffering, David took shelter in the cave made famous by the body of another climber known as Green Boots. He sat down to rest, and he never got back up. In the early morning hours of May 15th, the first teams on their way to the summit encountered David. They found him alive, but just barely. They shouted at him, but he just weakly waved them away. As the morning went on, more than 30 climbers passed him. Some gave him oxygen, some tried to warm him, but he was frozen to the ground, a dead weight at 27,900 feet. Moving him would have required an immense effort, one that the climbers, themselves battling for survival in the death zone, simply did not have. He couldn't stand, even with help. And so, one by one, they moved on. As climbers descended later that day, they passed him again. His condition had worsened. Footage captured by a documentary crew shows a figure huddled in the cave as others try to help, before ultimately leaving. Mark Inglis, the first double amputee to summit Everest, passed him on his way down. He later said he radioed base camp about the dying climber, but was told there was nothing that could be done. By late afternoon, David Sharp was dead. He was 34 years old. When the news broke, a firestorm of controversy erupted. "Left to die on Everest," the headline screamed. More than 40 climbers passed a dying man. How could this happen? The legendary Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to summit Everest, was scathing. He said, "On my expedition, there was no way that you would have left a man under a rock to die." He felt the commercialization of Everest had eroded the very soul of mountaineering. The climbers who passed David defended their actions by pointing to the brutal reality of the death zone. At that altitude, your body is shutting down. You are exhausted, your judgment is impaired. A rescue of someone who cannot walk is a monumental, if not impossible, task. It would have required hours of work by multiple strong people on treacherous terrain, almost certainly risking their own lives. As one teen found out a year earlier, even a planned recovery with 14 climbers could only move a body 500 feet before they had to give up from exhaustion. They also pointed out that David had made his own choices. He climbed alone, without a radio, and without adequate support. He knew the unwritten rule of Everest: if you can't save yourself, no one else can. You are on your own. So, could he have been saved? The timeline is everything. If he had been convinced to turn around when first spotted in the early hours, maybe. But by the time he was found immobile in the cave at dawn, he was likely past the point of no return. His body was shutting down. Some experts believe a massive, coordinated effort could have dragged him to a lower altitude. Others are convinced it was already too late. What is certain is that no coordinated rescue was ever attempted. Perhaps the most powerful voice in this whole debate was that of David's mother, Linda Sharp. With incredible grace, she defended the climbers. She said, "Your responsibility is to save yourself, not to try to save anybody else. ... It was his dream. He was where he would have wanted to have been." Her forgiveness brought a measure of peace to a tragedy that haunted the climbing world, absolving those who had to make an impossible choice. David Sharp's death forced a reckoning on Everest. Expeditions now place a greater emphasis on communication and teamwork. His story is a brutal reminder of the dangers of climbing alone and cutting corners on support. He tried to save money and paid the ultimate price. His death showed the world that Everest is an indifferent, deadly place where ambition can be fatal, and it exposed the painful limits of human endurance and compassion at the top of the world. May 10th, 1996. The skies above Mount Everest are clear. The winds are calm. It's a perfect day to summit, and multiple expeditions are ready to seize the opportunity. On the south side, 2 commercial teams led by Rob Hall and Scott Fisher begin their final push. On the north side, an Indian team prepares for their attempt. By the next day, 15 people will be dead, making it the deadliest disaster in Everest's history at that point. The 1996 tragedy has been dissected in books like John Krakauer's Into Thin Air and depicted in films, yet questions remain. How did a perfect day turn so deadly? Could it have been prevented? While the deaths of Rob Hall and Scott Fisher on the south side have been widely covered, a parallel tragedy unfolded on the north. 3 Indian climbers, Tsewang Paljor, Tsewang Smanla, and Dorj Morap, perished in relative obscurity. One of them would become the infamous landmark, Green Boots. Their story deserves to be told. One of the key factors in the disaster was simple overcrowding. On May 10th, dozens of climbers were all heading for the summit at the same time, creating a bottleneck at the Hillary step, a 40-foot vertical rock face just below the peak. With only one fixed rope, climbers had to wait in line, single file. This traffic jam burned precious time and oxygen at over 28,000 feet. The delays pushed many climbers past the critical 2 p.m. turnaround time. This rule exists for a reason. Descending in darkness is incredibly dangerous, and every extra minute in the death zone increases the risk of fatal altitude sickness. But summit fever is a powerful force. People had paid up to $65,000 and dedicated months to this moment. The summit was right there. They pushed on. Rob Hall and his client Doug Hansen didn't summit until 4 p.m., 2 hours late. By then, the perfect weather was starting to turn. Around 6 p.m., a massive storm engulfed the upper mountain. Hurricane-force winds, zero visibility, and plummeting temperatures turned a clear day into a whiteout blizzard in under an hour. Exhausted, low on oxygen, and descending in the dark, many climbers became disoriented and lost the route. Rob Hall was stuck on the south summit with his client Doug Hansen, who was too weak to move. Scott Fisher collapsed from exhaustion somewhere above the south col. On the other side of the mountain, the 3 Indian climbers, who had radioed their summit success just after 3:45 p.m., were now descending directly into the storm, separated and fighting for their lives alone. Through the long night of May 10th, the tragedy deepened. Rob Hall stayed on the radio with base camp, his conversations heartbreaking. He spoke to his pregnant wife, Jan, via satellite phone. Knowing he was dying, they chose a name for their unborn daughter, Sarah. Doug Hansen died beside him sometime during the night. Hall himself survived for nearly 24 hours in the open before his radio went silent. His body was later found, frozen at the south summit. Scott Fisher also perished, as did Yasuko Namba, a Japanese climber who was left behind when rescuers focused on those with a better chance of survival. In total, 8 people died on the south side. Meanwhile, on the north side, an equally devastating story was unfolding. 3 members of the Indian expedition had pushed for the summit despite the worsening weather. They radioed their success at 3:45 p.m., but some believe the poor visibility may have caused them to mistake a false summit for the real one. As they descended into the blizzard, they became separated. The next day, a Japanese team ascending the route found their bodies. Tsewang Smanla and Dorj Morap were found frozen on the ridge, and Tsewang Paljor was discovered in a limestone cave, curled up in a fetal position, his bright green boots making him an unwitting landmark for nearly 2 decades. Their story received far less attention, but their loss was just as profound. Yet, amid the tragedy, there are stories of incredible survival. Beck Weathers, a client with Rob Hall's team, had developed severe vision problems and was told to wait at the south col. He was caught in the storm, collapsed, and was left for dead. Rescue teams passed him multiple times, finding no signs of life. His wife was even told he had perished. But the next morning, Beck Weathers woke up. After more than 15 hours exposed to sub-zero temperatures, he simply stood up and staggered back to camp, severely frostbitten but alive. His impossible survival and subsequent high-altitude helicopter rescue became a testament to the sheer power of the human will to live. Another key figure was Anatoly Baukriv, a guide for Scott Fisher's team. His actions were both heroic and controversial. He climbed without supplemental oxygen and descended ahead of his clients. When the storm hit, he repeatedly ventured back into the blizzard alone, rescuing 3 stranded climbers who would have otherwise died. John Krakauer, in Into Thin Air, criticized him for not staying with his clients. Baukriv defended his choices, arguing his methods allowed him to save lives. The debate continued until his tragic death in an avalanche the following year. But for many, he remains a hero who risked everything. So, what went wrong? It was a perfect storm of factors. Overcrowding caused critical delays. Summit fever clouded judgment, causing climbers to ignore the turnaround rule. The weather deteriorated with shocking speed. Some clients lacked the necessary experience, relying completely on their guides. And when the crisis hit, there was a failure of leadership and coordination between the different teams. The 1996 disaster was a brutal lesson that Everest cannot be bought or tamed. The mountain always has the final say. In the aftermath, things changed. The Nepalese government tightened permit requirements. Expedition companies improved safety protocols, and weather forecasting became more sophisticated. The 2 p.m. turnaround rule is now enforced much more strictly. But the ethical debate about the commercialization of Everest continues. Should anyone with enough money be allowed to attempt the world's highest peak? The mountain remains a dangerous place. Tragedies in 2014, 2015, and 2023 are stark reminders of that. The 1996 Everest disaster remains the most infamous tragedy in mountaineering history. It transformed Everest from a symbol of ultimate achievement into a symbol of ambition and loss. The bodies of climbers like Hall, Fisher, and Paljor became frozen monuments on the slopes, constant reminders that in the death zone, experience and preparation can mean very little. The mountain cannot be conquered. It can only, sometimes, be survived. In an age of GPS trackers and satellite phones, you'd think vanishing on Mount Everest was a thing of the past. But 2024 proved us wrong. The world's highest peak still has the power to make people disappear without a trace. In May of that year, multiple climbers went missing under mysterious circumstances, sparking tough questions about safety, overcrowding, and the very limits of our technology. On May 21st, British climber Daniel Paul Patterson and his guide, Patenji Sherpa, stood on top of the world. It was a lifelong dream come true for Daniel, a journey he'd shared with thousands on Instagram. But somewhere on their way down, in the treacherous death zone, they were reportedly hit by a collapsing wall of ice, and then they were gone. Despite a massive search, they were never seen again. They joined the silent ranks of those who remain on the mountain forever, and they weren't the only ones. That same season, 2 Mongolian climbers, a Kenyan climber, and his guide also vanished. Even with hundreds of people on the mountain, they simply disappeared into Everest's vast frozen landscape. Daniel Patterson wasn't just another thrill seeker. At 40, he was a beloved CrossFit gym owner from Wakefield, England, known for helping others push their limits. But he had his own ultimate goal, Everest. He trained relentlessly, not for fame, but to prove something to himself. He was even climbing to raise money for a family who'd lost a loved one to cancer. He did everything by the book, hired a top-notch company, had an experienced guide, and acclimatized perfectly. His partner, Bex, got the triumphant news he'd reached the summit. And then silence. An ice fall, the expedition company said. But with no witnesses and no bodies, the truth of what happened in those final moments is a mystery locked away in the ice. When Daniel and Paz Tenji didn't return, a desperate search began. Sherpas retraced their steps, and high-powered binoculars scanned every slope. But searching Everest is like looking for a needle in a continent-sized haystack. A person can be invisible just a few feet away, hidden in a crevasse or by a light dusting of snow. After 4 days, the search was called off. They were presumed lost to the mountain. As his partner Bex wrote, Dan is not just an adventurer. He is a beloved son, brother, partner, and friend. For his family and the family of Pa Tenji Sherpa, the grief is compounded by the not knowing, a void as vast as the mountain itself. Just days earlier, 2 Mongolian climbers, Yusak Kargol Sedendamba and Purev Sirin Haghagla Jav, had also vanished. They were attempting the climb in its purest, most dangerous form, alpine style, with no Sherpa support and no extra oxygen. They radioed from the final camp, ready for their summit push, and were never heard from again. A week later, their bodies were found near the top. Had they made it? Did they die on the way up or down? Without any witnesses, their final chapter remains unwritten. The expedition company said they had offered the men free guides, but the climbers were confident in their own skills. On Everest, confidence is essential, but it offers no guarantees. Then there was Joshua Chariot Kirui, a 40-year-old banker from Kenya. He was attempting to be the first African to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. His home country followed his journey with pride. On May 22nd, his body was found just shy of the summit. He had been so close to making history. But on Everest, nearly is a fatal word. Tragically, his guide, Nawang Sherpa, was also missing and has never been found. An experienced Sherpa vanishing like that suggests a catastrophic event, a sudden fall, or an avalanche. For Joshua's supporters, it was a day of profound sadness. His story is a stark reminder of how hostile the environment is at that altitude, where the human body is pushed past its breaking point. So what really happened to Daniel Patterson and Pa Tenji Sherpa? The official report says an ice fall. These are a constant danger on Everest as the glaciers shift and groan under their own immense weight. A huge tower of ice could have collapsed, or falling ice could have triggered an avalanche, sweeping them off the path. What's baffling is that they summited early in the morning, perfect timing to avoid the afternoon heat that makes ice unstable. They were doing everything right. Yet, on a route climbed by hundreds, they vanished. The death zone lives up to its name. It's where exhaustion and lack of oxygen lead to fatal mistakes. But in this case, we don't even know if a mistake was made. The mountain simply took them. This brings up a hard truth. Our technology has limits. GPS trackers tell you where you are, but they can't stop you from falling. A satellite phone is useless if you're unconscious. The best gear in the world can't change the fact that humans are not meant to survive at 29,000 feet. The 2024 season was a brutal reminder that despite all our advancements, Everest is, and always will be, a wild and unpredictable force of nature. Another huge factor might be the crowds. In 2024, Nepal issued over 400 permits. With guides, that's more than 800 people funneled onto a narrow path during a few short weather windows. Viral videos showed long traffic jams at bottlenecks like the Hillary Step. These delays force climbers to spend more time in the death zone, burning precious oxygen and energy. Rescues become a logistical nightmare. But Everest is big business, bringing in millions of dollars. The tragic reality is that the pressure for profit might be costing lives, turning a personal challenge into a deadly waiting game. Behind every disappearance is a family left with a gaping hole in their lives. Daniel Patterson's partner and family, the families of the Mongolian climbers, Joshua Kirui's community in Kenya, and the family of 23-year-old Patenji Sherpa. For many Sherpas, climbing isn't a passion project. It's a job, the best way to support their families. They risk their lives for their clients' dreams. And when they're lost, their families are left with unanswered questions that will haunt them forever. The disappearances of 2024 are the latest in a long, tragic pattern. From Mallory and Irvine in 1924 to the dozens lost in recent years, Everest has a history of claiming lives and keeping its secrets. No matter how much we learn or how advanced our gear becomes, the mountain always has the final say. It exists at the absolute edge of human survival, where bad luck is as fatal as bad judgment. Somewhere on that vast expanse of ice and rock, Daniel Patterson, Patenji Sherpa, and Nawang Sherpa remain. They have become part of the mountain's enduring mystery, a solemn reminder of its power and our place in the face of it. Have you ever wondered what secrets lie hidden in the highest, most remote corners of our planet? For centuries, the people of the Himalayas have told stories of a creature that roams the snow-covered peaks, a creature they call the Yeti. Described as large, hairy, and walking on 2 feet, this being was powerful enough to kill a yak, yet smart enough to avoid humans. To the local Sherpa, Tibetan, and Nepali communities, the Yeti wasn't just a legend. It was a real part of their world, a powerful presence deserving of respect. When Western explorers arrived in the early 20th century, they initially dismissed these tales as folklore. But then, they started seeing things for themselves. Enormous footprints in the snow at altitudes where no human should be, and strange howls echoing through the night. The question began to form: could an unknown primate really exist in these vast, unexplored mountains? The most famous piece of evidence for the Yeti is a photograph taken in 1951 by the respected British mountaineer Eric Shipton. While exploring a glacier near Mount Everest at 20,000 feet, his team stumbled upon a line of huge fresh footprints. Shipton photographed one, placing his ice axe next to it for scale. The print was massive, about 13 inches long and 8 inches wide, and looked surprisingly human-like, with a clear heel and 5 toes. The photo caused a worldwide sensation. Skeptics argued it was just a bear track, distorted by melting snow. But Shipton was an expert mountaineer. He knew what bear tracks looked like. To this day, the photograph remains a tantalizing mystery, the single most compelling piece of evidence that something unknown walks the high Himalayas. But the Yeti isn't the only mystery these mountains hold. Pemba Dorje, a legendary Sherpa who has summited Everest over 20 times, has spoken of other strange encounters. He claims to have seen figures on the mountain that simply vanished when he got closer. He felt unseen presences in his tent at night and heard voices calling his name on the wind. Are these just hallucinations caused by extreme altitude and lack of oxygen? The death zone, above 8,000 meters, is notorious for tricking the mind. Climbers have reported seeing phantom cities and talking to deceased relatives. Yet Dorje and other Sherpas feel that some experiences can't be explained by science alone. They believe Everest is inhabited by spirits, reminders that the mountain is a sacred place where humans are only visitors. In the village of Konjong, a monastery claims to hold physical proof of the Yeti, a scalp. For centuries, this conical reddish-brown artifact has been revered by the local monks. In 1960, Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to climb Everest, borrowed the scalp and sent it for scientific analysis. The results were a letdown for believers. DNA tests revealed it was made from the skin of a serow, a local goat antelope. But does a fake relic disprove the real thing? For the monks, the scientific results didn't matter. The scalp's power was symbolic. It represented the untamed spirit of the Himalayas, a mystery that transcends simple biology. In the modern era, the search for the Yeti has gone high-tech. In 2014, a geneticist from Oxford University analyzed dozens of hair samples said to be from the creature. Most turned out to be from known animals like bears and goats. But 2 samples were intriguing. Their DNA didn't match any known animal exactly, but was incredibly similar to an ancient polar bear that lived 40,000 years ago. This sparked a theory. Maybe the Yeti legend was inspired by a rare, undiscovered species of bear, while later studies suggested it was likely a Himalayan brown bear with unusual genetics. The idea that a large, unknown animal could be roaming the mountains persists. Despite the lack of proof, the search for the Yeti continues. People are still drawn to the mystery, using trail cameras, thermal imaging, and drones to scan the remote valleys. Why? Because the Yeti represents the idea that our world still holds secrets. In an age where every corner of the globe seems to be mapped, the thought of an undiscovered creature is thrilling. And the Himalayas are one of the few places vast and remote enough to hide such a secret. Perhaps the Yeti is a cultural legend, a way for people to make sense of strange sounds and tracks. Or maybe, just maybe, it's still out there. Beyond the Yeti, Everest itself seems haunted. Many climbers report encountering what they believe are the ghosts of those who have died on its slopes. A figure in old-fashioned gear appears ahead, only to vanish. A feeling of an invisible presence walking beside you. This is known as the third man factor, where climbers in desperate situations feel a helpful entity guiding them to safety. Psychologists say it's a coping mechanism of a stressed brain. But for those who've experienced it, the presence felt undeniably real, like a guardian angel or the mountain spirit itself. Another common report is hearing voices in the wind. Climbers alone on the vast ice fields will hear their name called clear as day, but turn to find no one. The rational explanation is auditory pareidolia. The wind howling through rocks creates sounds that the oxygen-starved brain interprets as speech. But what about the climbers who claim to have had full conversations, receiving warnings or guidance from voices of deceased loved ones? Whether it's a trick of the mind or something more, these experiences often save lives, telling climbers when to turn back from a fatal path. To the Sherpa people, Everest is not just a rock. It is Chamalongma, the mother goddess of the world, a living, conscious deity. Before any expedition, they perform a puja ceremony, asking the mountain for permission to climb and for safe passage. They believe that approaching the mountain with arrogance, without showing respect, invites disaster. And strangely, expeditions that skip this ritual often seem to have more accidents. Is it the mountain's anger? Or does the ceremony simply put climbers in a more humble, cautious mindset? In the West, we seek scientific answers. But on Everest, the line between science and spirituality begins to blur. In the end, science can explain many of Everest's mysteries as tricks of the mind, brought on by hypoxia and exhaustion. Yet, some things resist easy explanation. The mountain pushes humans to their physical and mental limits, to a place where reality itself seems to bend. Whether it's the ghosts of climbers past, the spirit of Chamalongma, or a real creature hiding in the valleys, the mysteries endure. And perhaps that's the point. In 1933, a man named Morris Wilson hatched one of the most bizarre plans in mountaineering history. Wilson wasn't a climber. He'd never set foot on a major peak, had zero alpine training, and knew nothing about high altitude. He was a British Army officer, wounded in World War I, who struggled with depression and poor health for years after. Then, in 1932, he found what he believed was a miracle cure: intense prayer and fasting. He felt reborn, convinced that faith could conquer any obstacle. To prove this to the world, he needed an impossible challenge. He chose Mount Everest. His plan was gloriously insane. First, buy a plane, even though he couldn't fly. Then, learn to fly it. Fly solo to Tibet, crash land on the slopes of Everest, and then, with no equipment, climb to the summit powered only by his faith. Everyone, from friends to aviation experts, told him he was crazy, but Wilson's belief was absolute. He bought a gypsy moth biplane and painted Everest on the side. He took just enough flying lessons to be dangerous. When aviation authorities, horrified by his plan, denied him clearance to fly to India, he simply took off anyway. His illegal flight was a chaotic adventure of forced landings, mechanical failures, and arrests for violating airspace. But somehow, through sheer stubbornness and a bit of luck, he made it to India. There, the British authorities, already warned about his intentions, confiscated his plane. Wilson's grand plan was foiled, but give up? Not a chance. He decided he would simply trek to Everest, sneak across the border into Tibet, and climb the mountain on foot. The fact that he had no gear, no experience, and no clue what he was doing didn't matter. Faith, he believed, would see him through. In 1934, disguised as a Buddhist monk, Wilson hired several Sherpas and began the long trek to the mountain. They were bewildered by this strange Englishman who spoke of conquering the world's highest peak with prayer, but he paid well. The journey was grueling, and Wilson suffered from the altitude. When they finally reached the Rongbuk Glacier at the base of Everest, the Sherpas refused to go any further. They tried to explain the realities of the climb, pointing out his lack of crampons, ice axe, proper clothing, everything. Wilson had little more than street clothes and his unshakable faith. He waved off their concerns and set off alone. He quickly learned that faith doesn't provide much grip on a vertical ice wall. On May 22, 1934, at about 23,000 feet, he came up against a 40-foot wall of sheer ice. He tried to climb it for days, growing weaker and colder. Finally, he wrote one last entry in his diary. Off again. Gorgeous day. Then he lay down in the snow to rest and never got up. A year later, a British expedition led by Eric Shipton found Maurice Wilson's body, frozen solid in a makeshift camp. His diary, found beside him, told the story of his final futile attempts. The discovery created a small media storm. Some mocked the mad Englishman, while others saw a tragic figure, a man so broken by war that he chased an impossible dream to his death. The expedition buried Wilson in a crevasse, but his story didn't end there. Over the years, as the glacier shifted, his body reportedly re-emerged, and then came a truly bizarre twist. In the 1960s, a Chinese expedition claimed to have found a woman's 1930s-style high-heeled shoe near where Wilson died. This sparked wild rumors. Was Wilson a cross-dresser? We know he worked in a women's clothing store before his Everest obsession, but the rest is pure speculation. It's a strange footnote to an already strange story. So, was Maurice Wilson insane? By today's standards, his behavior points to possible delusions, likely stemming from his war trauma. Yet, there's another perspective. The greatest achievements in history often come from people who refuse to believe in the word impossible. Wilson had that same incredible determination, but he lacked the skills to back it up. That was his tragedy. There's a fine line between a visionary and a fool. Wilson crossed it, but his core belief that we are capable of more than we think isn't entirely wrong. His mistake was thinking spiritual strength could replace physical skill. Everest requires both. The Sherpas who guided him found him both admirable and baffling. They respected his spiritual drive, but couldn't understand his rejection of practical preparation. In their culture, the spiritual and the practical must work together. His story became a cautionary tale among them, but they always spoke of him with a certain fondness. He was sincere, just fatally wrong. Wilson's legend lives on, a symbol of extreme summit fever. His failure reinforced that Everest can't be conquered by willpower alone. It demands strategy, teamwork, and skill, everything the successful 1953 expedition had. Yet his absolute commitment has also inspired some climbers who see a reflection of their own drive to push limits. Compared to modern solo climbers, the difference is preparation. Reinhold Messner, who soloed Everest without oxygen, had decades of experience. He was a master of his craft. Wilson had only enthusiasm. If he had taken the time to learn, to train, his incredible willpower might have actually gotten him to the top. But he wanted a shortcut, and the mountains showed him there are none. The final mystery is Wilson's true motive. Was he proving the power of faith, or seeking a noble end to a life of pain? His last diary entry, "Off again, gorgeous day," suggests a man full of hope, perhaps unaware of how close he was to the end. He reached an astonishing height for an amateur, but Everest demanded more. Morris Wilson remains one of the mountain's most tragic and compelling phantoms, a testament to human courage, delusion, and the brutal limits of belief. As global temperatures rise, Mount Everest is giving up secrets it has held for decades. The Khumbu Glacier, a river of ice climbers must cross, is melting at an alarming rate. As it retreats, it's revealing what was once buried. In recent years, more and more bodies have been discovered, emerging from the ice people who died decades ago, their disappearances documented but their fates unknown until now. It's like an unexpected archaeological dig, but these aren't ancient artifacts. They're recent dead, people whose families may still be wondering what happened. Each discovery is a macabre time capsule, raising haunting questions. Who was this person? And what was their final story? Mount Everest has claimed over 300 lives, and about 100 bodies are still up there. But not all of them can be identified. Some are just too damaged by time and the elements. Others are simply unknown climbers who vanished without a trace, their expeditions poorly documented. Record keeping in the early days was informal, and people could disappear with little notice. There are even unconfirmed rumors of secret military expeditions gone wrong, meaning the official death toll might be higher than we think. This creates a tough ethical question. Should we use DNA to identify them, potentially giving families closure? Or should we let them rest in peace on the mountain they loved? Different cultures have different answers, and there's no easy solution. One of the most bizarre Everest legends is the alleged 1952 Russian expedition. The story goes that a massive Soviet team set out to conquer Everest and plant statues of Lenin and Stalin on the summit, a huge political statement. They reportedly reached high on the mountain, and then they vanished. The entire expedition gone without a trace. But did it actually happen? The Soviet government always denied it, and there are no official records. It could have been Cold War propaganda, a wild rumor to make the Soviets look reckless. Or maybe a small secret team did perish, and it was all covered up. Without proof, it remains one of Everest's most tantalizing what-ifs. In May 2006, a story unfolded that still baffles medical experts. Australian climber Lincoln Hall summited Everest, but collapsed on the way down. His Sherpas fought to save him, but as night fell, he was declared dead. His family was notified. Obituaries were written. But the next morning, another team found him sitting up in the snow, alive. He had survived a night without oxygen or shelter at 28,000 feet. He was disoriented, frostbitten, and thought he was on a boat, but he was breathing. A massive rescue effort brought him down. How did he survive? Doctors have no clear answer. It was a true miracle on Everest, a man who literally came back from the dead. Beyond the famous mystery of Mallory and Irvine's camera, many other cameras have gone missing on Everest, taking their secrets with them. In 1998, Francys Arsentiev and her husband Sergei summited without oxygen. Sergei's body was found, but his camera wasn't. What images might it hold of their final hours? During the 1996 disaster, several climbers lost their cameras in the storm. Each one is a lost piece of history, a frozen moment that could answer lingering questions. People now specifically search for them, but as technology shifts from film to digital, The chances of recovering data from a camera lost for years in the extreme cold are actually getting smaller, leaving these visual records lost to time. The Khumbu Icefall is a chaotic, constantly moving maze of ice that climbers must navigate. It's one of the most dangerous places on Earth. In 2014, it became the site of a horrific tragedy. A massive block of ice broke off, triggering an avalanche that swept through a group of Sherpas preparing the route. 16 men were killed in an instant. The disaster highlighted the incredible risks Sherpas take, often for far less reward than their Western clients. It led to protests and demands for better pay and insurance. Even now, mysteries about that day remain. Why did some survive while others, just feet away, did not? It was a brutal reminder that on Everest, survival can come down to pure random chance. Everest creates its own weather, and it's dangerously unpredictable. Climbers talk about death zone clouds that appear from nowhere, trapping them in a total whiteout. There are also sudden, violent wind gusts that can nearly blow you off the mountain, even on a calm day. These aren't normal weather patterns. They're unique to the mountain's extreme altitude. Some climbers even report seeing strange optical illusions, like halos of light or weird colors in the snow. While science can explain some of it, the mountain's weather remains one of its biggest mysteries. Despite all our modern forecasting technology, Everest can still unleash a storm that surprises and kills even the most experienced climbers. The Sherpa Sardars, the lead guides on Everest, possess a knowledge that goes beyond maps or GPS. It's a deep, intuitive understanding passed down through generations. They can predict weather changes by reading subtle signs in the sky that instruments miss. They talk about the mountain's moods, sensing when it's safe to climb and when it's not. Western climbers who listen to a Sardar as gut feeling that the mountain doesn't feel right often avoid disaster. Is it mysticism, or is it just deep experience and pattern recognition? Whatever it is, this intuitive knowledge is a crucial part of climbing Everest safely, a wisdom that can't be found in any textbook. What does the future hold for Everest? As climate change melts the glaciers, the mountain is literally transforming. Once stable routes are becoming more dangerous, and old secrets are being revealed as bodies emerge from the ice. This raises new ethical dilemmas. Should we leave the dead where they fell, or should we bring them home? Technology like GPS and satellites makes climbing safer, but the mountain remains vast and unforgiving. People will still vanish, storms will still surprise, and new tragedies will create new mysteries. No matter how much we learn, Everest will always hold secrets, constantly shifting and evolving, but never fully giving them up. For millions of years, Everest has stood silent and supreme. Our century of climbing is just a brief moment in its long history. The mysteries we chase of lost climbers and vanished expeditions are ultimately human stories of courage, ambition, and fragility. The mountain will keep many of its secrets forever, and maybe that's the point. In a world where everything is mapped and measured, Everest reminds us that there's value in mystery. It humbles us, keeps us wondering, and whispers that some questions are meant to stay unanswered, frozen in its ice, carried on the endless wind at the roof of the world. For 2 hours, we've walked the icy slopes of Mount Everest, exploring its deepest mysteries. We've stood with Mallory and Irvine, wondering if they saw the summit before they vanished. We've encountered green boots, sleeping beauty, and the German woman's souls reduced to landmarks, their stories haunting the mountain. We've relived the 1996 disaster, where a perfect storm claimed the lives of experienced climbers. We've witnessed the tragic death of David Sharp, passed by dozens as he lay dying, forcing us to question our own ethics. We've followed Morris Wilson's impossible dream to fly a plane to Everest and climb it through sheer faith. We've chased the shadow of the Yeti and considered whether these phenomena are just tricks of the mind or something more. And we've looked at the new mysteries emerging today, the disappearances, the bodies revealed by a changing climate, and the questions that never seem to end. So, what have we learned? Perhaps the biggest lesson is that Everest is never truly conquered. Despite all our modern gear, decades of knowledge, and expert guides, the mountain remains as wild and dangerous as ever. People still disappear. The mysteries continue. Let's talk numbers. In recent years, Everest has a death rate of about 1 to 1.5%. That's roughly one death for every 70 successful summits. While that's a huge improvement from the early days, it's still a staggering risk. But there is an uncomfortable truth we have to face. Sherpas bear a disproportionate amount of this risk. While the overall death rate is around 1.5%, for Sherpas, it's closer to 3%. They make multiple trips through the most treacherous parts, like the Khumbu Icefall, carrying gear and fixing ropes for clients. They do this not for the glory of the summit, but because it's one of the best ways to earn a living in their region. A Sherpa guide might make $8,000 in a season, while clients are paying up to $100,000 for their spot on an expedition. It's a complex relationship, often built on deep respect and friendship, but a stark economic imbalance lies underneath. It forces us to ask, is it fair to pay someone to take these risks for our dreams? Many of Everest's tragedies boil down to bad decisions made at extreme altitude, a phenomenon known as summit fever. It's an obsessive desire to reach the top that clouds all rational judgment. Climbers push past their safe turnaround times, ignore their body's warning signs, and take insane risks. Why? It's a mix of things. The massive investment of time and money, the social pressure to succeed, and the simple fact that high altitude messes with your brain. Oxygen deprivation impairs judgment and can even create a sense of euphoria, masking the real danger. The summit is asterisk, right there asterisk, so close you can taste it, and that makes it incredibly hard to turn back. Summit fever has likely killed more climbers than any storm or avalanche. It disguises itself as determination, but it's a deadly trap. The story of David Sharp, who died alone in a cave while dozens of climbers passed him, forces us to confront an impossible ethical question. What do we owe a stranger in the death zone? A utilitarian might argue that attempting a rescue that's likely to fail and kill more people is illogical. Others would say we have an absolute duty to help, no matter the odds. The reality for most climbers is somewhere in the middle. They might offer oxygen or help someone move, but when it becomes clear that a full rescue would jeopardize their own lives, they make the agonizing choice to move on. It's easy to judge from our armchairs, but up there, with your own life hanging by a thread, the decision is anything but simple. What about those who don't make it back? What do we owe the dead of Everest? Using bodies like green boots as landmarks feels wrong, because these were people with names, families, and stories. green boots was Tsewang Paljor, a 28-year-old Indian climber. Sleeping Beauty was Francys Arsentiev, a mother who became the first American woman to summit without oxygen. Remembering their names, their humanity, is perhaps the greatest respect we can pay them. It prevents them from becoming just another feature on the landscape. With every generation, new technology seems to promise a safer Everest. From better oxygen in the 20s to GPS and satellite phones today, we always think we've finally tamed the mountain. But this is a form of hubris. Technology helps, but it can't change the fundamental reality. Everest is nearly 29,000 feet high. The air is unbreathable, and the weather is savagely unpredictable. The mountain teaches humility. It reminds us that there are forces in nature far beyond our control. And maybe that's why people still climb it, because it offers a genuine challenge that technology can't erase. Looking to the future, Everest faces new challenges. Climate change is making the Khumbu icefall more unstable and increasing rockfall danger. Overcrowding creates dangerous traffic jams high on the mountain. And there is a question of whether younger generations of Sherpas will continue to take on this perilous work. The mysteries will continue. The mountain will change, but it will endure. Watching our fleeting stories of triumph and tragedy play out on its slopes. So why do they climb? For some, it's about testing their limits. For others, it's a spiritual quest or a way to escape. Each reason is deeply personal, but they all help explain why people are willing to face the danger, the mysteries, and the mountain itself. We've reached the end of our journey. Some mysteries, like Mallory and Irvine's fate, may be getting closer to being solved, but so many remain. Perhaps it's for the best. In a world where everything is mapped and explained, Everest reminds us that there is still wonder, still mystery, still things that are bigger than us. The mountain was here long before we were, and it will be here long after we're gone. Its silence and its secrets will endure. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. If you enjoyed exploring these stories, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more deep dives into the world's greatest mysteries. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.